I gripped the steering wheel tight on Interstate 30 while a terrible intuition forced me to call my father. My name is Sylvia, and I am a 38-year-old woman who prefers fixing problems before they start. I realized something was completely wrong when I could not reach my grandma for 2 consecutive days. Knowing she needed critical heart surgery soon made my chest tighten with a familiar dread. I decided to call my dad directly to demand the exact schedule of her upcoming medical procedure. He answered the phone with a casually indifferent tone and delivered a short response saying, "It was done last week." My mind raced as I desperately tried to process how they could proceed without the top-tier medical team I arranged. I immediately pressed him by asking, "Did you guys really not receive the priority mail from the hospital or my text messages?" His voice carried a sickeningly arrogant smirk as he replied, "Yes, we did, but it went straight into the trash." He abruptly hung up the phone after refusing to give me the name of the medical facility where they had taken her. Sitting in my car with the dial tone echoing in my ears made the horrifying truth crystal clear. They were playing a dangerous game with my grandmother's life, just to satisfy their own ruthless greed. Welcome back to another story where the people who should protect you end up causing the most severe damage. Grab your snacks and remember that the individuals in these situations had every opportunity to do the right thing, but consciously chose betrayal. This specific story proves that undeniable greed can utterly destroy even the closest blood relations. If you want to see exactly what kind of heavy price arrogance eventually pays, drop a comment and subscribe to follow this journey to the very end. 4 hours after that infuriating phone call ended, I parked my vehicle forcefully in front of a dilapidated private medical clinic located on the desolate outskirts of Little Rock. I bypassed the completely unattended reception desk to march straight into the poorly illuminated recovery ward without waiting for any formal permission. My chest tightened painfully the moment I finally located my grandma Josephine, lying deeply unconscious on a terribly thin mattress. She was surrounded by heavily outdated monitoring equipment, emitting weak electronic beeps, while absolutely no doctor or qualified nurse remained present in the room to supervise her fragile condition following a major cardiac operation. I stepped back into the narrow corridor just as a middle-aged man wearing a wrinkled white coat casually strolled out of a nearby break room holding a styrofoam coffee cup. I physically blocked his designated path to fiercely demand precise answers regarding the absent attending physician and the shockingly low standard of post-operative care being provided to a critically vulnerable patient. He nervously introduced himself as the clinic manager before attempting to brush past me with a highly dismissive excuse about the facility being severely short-staffed during the late afternoon shift. I refused to let him leave the hallway and firmly demanded to see the complete medical chart containing the itemized surgical package details associated with her specific room number. Grabbing the worn plastic clipboard from his increasingly reluctant hands to carefully inspect the attached administrative paperwork revealed a highly detailed breakdown of the specific medical supplies utilized during the operation. Scanning the itemized billing codes quickly confirmed my worst suspicions because this questionable facility clearly offered the absolute cheapest cardiac rates available anywhere in the entire state of Arkansas. The sickening reality of the situation washed over me completely as I read through the severely compromised medical inventory list detailing generic anesthetics and minimal life support allocations. My dad Scott and my mom Beverly had deliberately bypassed the top-tier cardiac center I had already organized and prepaid to ensure her ultimate safety. They purposefully subjected a vulnerable elderly woman to this hazardous environment instead of a reputable hospital, simply to minimize the required upfront surgical expenses. I pulled out my smartphone to document the evidence before aggressively demanding the manager explain the massive discrepancy between the cheap supplies listed on the chart and the premium procedures typically required for this condition. Sweating profusely under my relentless verbal pressure, the visibly intimidated employee finally confessed that he was strictly following the explicit financial instructions provided by the patient's legally appointed medical guardians. He reluctantly revealed that Mom and Dad had specifically requested him to perform the absolute cheapest possible surgery while simultaneously preparing a heavily inflated medical invoice for their personal records. The mathematical calculation became disgustingly clear as I realized they planned to submit maximum financial claims to the premium insurance provider while forcing her to endure a dangerously cut-rate procedure. Their ultimate objective was obviously never about restoring her failing cardiovascular health, but rather successfully pocketing the enormous financial difference for their own selfish monetary gain. Knowing perfectly well that leaving her in this highly incompetent facility for even another hour could easily result in a fatal post-operative complication, I refused to waste another single second engaging with the corrupt staff. I turned my back on him completely and immediately dialed the direct emergency dispatch line for a premier private medical transport company based securely in the downtown hospital district. I firmly authorized an immediate premium wire transfer directly from my personal savings account to dispatch their most advanced mobile intensive care ambulance straight to our exact suburban coordinates. I then returned to the dimly lit recovery room to stand resolutely beside her rusted metal bed frame while patiently waiting for the professional transport team to arrive. I needed to ensure absolutely nobody from this fraudulent clinic dared to touch her or interfere with her medical transfer before the real professionals took over her care. By Monday morning, the crumpled payment records scattered across the glass conference table completely exposed the terrifying depths of their malicious intentions. I sat closely beside my attorney, Mr. Hayes, carefully placing the photocopied invoice from that dilapidated clinic directly next to the official compensation schedule provided by the premium insurance company. We needed to meticulously cross-reference every single billing code listed on those confidential documents to fully understand the massive scope of their financial manipulation regarding the recent medical operation. Mr. Hayes adjusted his reading glasses while rigorously scanning the contrasting numerical values printed on the official paperwork stacked neatly before him on the polished surface. The glaring inconsistencies between the actual basic medical supplies utilized during the dangerous procedure and the exorbitant claims submitted for subsequent reimbursement became undeniably apparent within just a few short minutes of our focused professional investigation. It quickly became obvious that Mom and Dad had specifically instructed the corrupt clinic manager to generate a completely fabricated medical invoice, inflating the total surgical costs by more than 3 times the actual market value of the services rendered. They intentionally orchestrated this deceptive administrative paperwork to fraudulently claim the maximum allowable cash payout from her comprehensive medical policy, while secretly paying the clinic absolute pennies for providing shockingly substandard care to a vulnerable patient. The sheer audacity required to actively exploit an elderly woman's life-threatening condition simply to falsely justify such an astronomical insurance claim left me feeling entirely disgusted by the people who originally raised me. They viewed her failing cardiovascular system not as a terrible family tragedy requiring immediate medical intervention, but rather as an incredibly lucrative financial opportunity to illegally enrich themselves without facing any perceived consequences. I slammed my index finger aggressively onto the final calculated total printed at the bottom of the forged document to draw his immediate attention to the undeniable proof resting right in front of us. I looked directly into his eyes and stated, "Look at these specific numbers because this massive discrepancy equals hundreds of thousands of dollars that they actively plan to pocket directly into their personal bank accounts." Mr. Hayes slowly nodded his head in absolute agreement while firmly confirming that we were looking at indisputable documentary evidence of premeditated insurance fraud taking place on a truly massive financial scale. He professionally explained that willfully submitting these specific forged medical records to a major commercial underwriter constituted a severe federal offense, carrying mandatory prison sentences alongside catastrophic financial penalties for every single person involved in the deceptive scheme. This chilling revelation firmly established that her compromised surgical care was absolutely never the unfortunate result of a simple administrative error or a misguided attempt to save a little bit of money during a stressful medical emergency. Their ongoing actions represented a highly calculated and meticulously executed criminal conspiracy designed specifically to transform a critically necessary cardiac operation into an enormous personal payday at the direct physical expense of a completely helpless patient. They willingly wagered her fragile physical existence on a dangerously unequipped operating table, specifically to maximize their illicit profit margins, without showing the slightest ounce of human compassion or basic familial loyalty towards their own flesh and blood. Boiling with an intense righteous fury over their bottomless greed, I explicitly instructed Mr. Hayes to immediately forward our entire compiled dossier of fraudulent evidence directly to the primary fraud investigation unit operating at the headquarters of the insurance provider. I aggressively demanded that he utilize every single available legal mechanism to institute an immediate emergency freeze on the pending cash disbursement process before a single fraudulent dollar could be successfully transferred into their personal financial accounts. He swiftly picked up his office telephone to contact the senior claims adjuster handling the specific file, while simultaneously drafting a formal legal hold notice to formally block the unauthorized distribution of the contested medical funds. Watching him quickly execute these urgent legal injunctions provided a deep sense of satisfaction, because taking this decisive action officially initiated the irreversible destruction of their arrogant financial plans. By Wednesday afternoon, the financial bomb officially detonated right in the middle of the living room inside my parents' suburban house. A certified express courier arrived directly at their front door to deliver a devastating legal notice from the premium insurance company outlining their immediate corporate actions. The formally drafted legal letter explicitly denied their entire reimbursement claim, while officially notifying them about an active criminal investigation regarding suspected medical record forgery. The corporate fraud division had completely frozen their comprehensive policy, pending a thorough federal review of the glaringly inconsistent surgical documents submitted earlier that week. Reading those clinical corporate words detailing severe legal consequences instantly evaporated the arrogant confidence they had maintained since initiating their selfish medical conspiracy. Almost simultaneously, another certified priority envelope arrived directly from the dilapidated local clinic they had specifically chosen to perform the dangerous cardiac procedure. The aggressive billing department at that highly questionable medical facility sent the actual debt invoice containing a truly astronomical, numerical figure directly to their residential address. Because the primary insurance provider had outright rejected the fraudulent submission, the clinic legally required immediate full payment for all the substandard services they had already rendered. Facing a sudden demand for hundreds of thousands of dollars payable upon receipt completely shattered their illusion of securing an easy financial profit at the expense of an elderly relative. The sheer magnitude of the legitimate financial debt suddenly resting squarely on their shoulders transformed their greed into sheer terror. Total panic instantly consumed the entire household as the terrifying reality of their imminent financial ruin finally became undeniably apparent to both of them. Mom started screaming frantically while ordering Dad to immediately search the filthy garage for the crucial documents they had previously discarded with such extreme prejudice. She yelled, "Scott, look closely, because the priority sponsorship papers Sylvia sent last week must still be somewhere inside this specific trash can." Dad immediately dropped to his knees on the stained concrete floor to frantically dig through days of accumulated foul-smelling garbage in a desperate search for their only salvation. His shaking hands eventually pulled out the heavily crumpled and severely stained VIP admission papers I had originally mailed them to secure the top-tier surgical team. Clutching the ruined medical documents tightly against his chest, he let out a sound of absolute despair that echoed throughout the dimly lit garage. He desperately roared, "We just threw away our completely free sponsorship opportunity with our own two hands." Staring blindly at the stained papers covered in coffee grounds, they finally recognized the catastrophic consequences of their profound arrogance. They realized in utter horror that their petty contempt for my sincere assistance had successfully robbed them of the exact lifeline they desperately needed to avoid total bankruptcy. The premium prepaid surgical package they had treated like worthless garbage represented the exact financial protection they now lacked while facing a massive corporate lawsuit and a crippling medical debt. The crippling weight of their self-inflicted catastrophe prompted a relentless barrage of incoming phone calls directed straight to my personal cellular device. My phone began vibrating continuously on my kitchen counter as Dad desperately tried to reach me in a state of absolute panic to beg for immediate financial salvation. I simply stood there with my arms firmly crossed across my chest, while coldly watching the digital screen light up repeatedly with his familiar caller identification. I felt absolutely no inclination to answer his desperate pleas or offer any false reassurances regarding the massive legal disaster they had willingly brought upon themselves. I maintained a chilling silence while watching each frantic incoming call inevitably time out and automatically forward directly to my electronic voicemail system without ever touching the device. Exactly at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, relentless pounding on the front door completely shattered the quiet atmosphere inside my otherwise peaceful living room. Opening the heavy wooden door revealed Mom and Dad standing on my front porch, looking utterly pathetic and thoroughly panicked by their rapidly deteriorating circumstances. They pushed their way inside the house while immediately launching into a highly theatrical performance designed specifically to portray themselves as innocent victims of a terrible medical misunderstanding. Tears streamed down her face as she loudly blamed the local clinic staff for arbitrarily altering the surgical procedures without properly consulting the family first. They desperately tried to convince me that the corrupt clinic manager had single-handedly orchestrated the entire billing catastrophe entirely behind their backs to maximize hospital profits. Mom continuously attempted to manipulate my emotions by grabbing my arm while unleashing a flood of desperate excuses and blatant lies meant to secure my financial compliance. She sobbed heavily while crying out, "It is entirely that terrible doctor's fault, because I swear I knew absolutely nothing about any inflated medical invoices being sent to the insurance company. You must withdraw your personal savings to help us pay this massive debt before the clinic forces us out onto the street through legal collections." Dad stood nervously behind her, nodding his head in rapid agreement, while trying to project an aura of helpless confusion regarding the sudden financial demands currently ruining their lives. Their combined performance was truly remarkable, but completely sickening to witness considering the undeniable truth I already securely possessed in my private files. I refused to utter a single word of comfort or offer any sympathetic reactions to their incredibly deceptive emotional performance playing out in my home. Pulling my arm violently away from her grasping hands, I walked silently toward the central coffee table with absolute emotional detachment dictating my every movement. I forcefully slammed down the official photocopied documents containing the federal asset freeze order directly alongside the heavily stained VIP admission receipt they had previously thrown away. The crumpled priority paperwork still bore the disgusting coffee stains from their filthy garage trash bin, serving as the ultimate physical proof of their profound arrogance and blatant disregard for life. The loud smack of the heavy legal paper hitting the wooden surface abruptly cut off their frantic crying and forced them to stare down at their own damning actions. watching their eyes widen in sheer terror as they recognized the discarded sponsorship forms, gave me a deep sense of righteous vindication regarding my previous investigative efforts. I leaned forward over the table while glaring directly into her terrified eyes to deliver the final crushing blow to their elaborate victim charade. I growled with a cold intensity that left absolutely no room for any further arguments. You do not need to act anymore because the authorizing signature on that inflated markup claim form is clearly yours. Pointing firmly at the specific ink marks validating the fraudulent medical submission completely destroyed their pathetic attempt to shift the legal blame onto the clinic staff or anyone else. Realizing that all their carefully rehearsed denial tactics were now completely useless against such irrefutable physical evidence caused their fake victim masks to shatter instantly before my eyes. The loud theatrical sobbing immediately stopped as a suffocatingly tense silence heavily settled over the entire living room while the absolute truth hung heavily in the air. Mom began trembling violently while staring blankly at her own forged signature, completely unable to formulate even a single coherent excuse to defend her criminal actions anymore. Dad visibly deflated like a punctured balloon, his shoulders slumping forward as the terrifying reality of impending federal fraud charges finally crushed his remaining arrogant pride into dust. They stood absolutely frozen in my living room without uttering another word, completely paralyzed by the horrifying understanding that their own relentless greed had permanently sealed their catastrophic legal fate. 10 days after that confrontation in my living room, their entire financial foundation was officially stripped away and rendered completely paralyzed. The regional bank formally executed a comprehensive court-ordered freeze on every single one of their personal savings accounts without any prior warning. This drastic legal measure was specifically implemented to secure guaranteed payment for the massive outstanding medical debt currently suspended at that dilapidated clinic in Little Rock. Finding themselves completely unable to withdraw even a single dollar or transfer, any emergency funds immediately ignited a vicious and highly destructive cycle of mutual blame between them. The fragile alliance they had built around their shared greed began completely fracturing under the crushing weight of their imminent financial destruction. Trapped inside a house they could no longer afford to maintain, Dad violently hurled a stack of unpaid utility bills across the kitchen counter in a fit of absolute rage. He aggressively pointed his finger directly at her face while viciously screaming, "This entire catastrophic mess is completely your fault. If you had not been so incredibly greedy about pocketing that insurance markup, we would never be facing total bankruptcy right now." Mom immediately retaliated with equal venom by sharply reminding him of his own crucial role in their collective downfall. She venomously shot back, "You were the brilliant mastermind who personally threw her prepaid VIP admission papers into the filthy garbage bin. Now your arrogant stupidity has officially cost us this entire house." Their continuous bitter arguments echoed relentlessly through the empty hallways as they desperately tried to shift the legal and moral responsibility onto each other. Their humiliating downfall became agonizingly public later that week when they attempted to purchase basic household groceries at the local neighborhood supermarket. Every single credit card they desperately swiped at the checkout register was immediately declined by the automated financial system with a loud warning beep. The cashier loudly informed them that their primary purchasing accounts had been permanently suspended by the issuing corporate institutions due to active legal injunctions. Standing completely humiliated in front of a long line of impatient customers, they were forced to slowly return their essential food items to the shelves because they simply could not pay for them. Their profound inability to finance even their most basic daily living requirements served as a brutal consequence of their own arrogant choices. The final devastating blow to their remaining false pride arrived early Friday morning in the form of a heavily armored bank courier vehicle parking directly in their driveway. A somber legal representative confidently walked up their pristine concrete pathway, holding a highly visible, brightly colored foreclosure notice stapled to a wooden stake. He formally hammered the heavy legal warning sign directly into the perfectly manicured front lawn they had spent countless hours proudly maintaining over the past decade. The bold black letters prominently displaying the impending property auction explicitly signaled their absolute loss of control over the major asset they valued above all else. Staring blankly out their front window at the undeniable proof of their impending eviction solidified the terrifying reality that their comfortable suburban lifestyle was officially over forever. By the end of November, a noticeably cheap commercial moving truck parked abruptly in front of the completely dried-out front yard belonging to that suburban property. The regional banking institution officially executed the final legal eviction notice, forcing Mom and Dad permanently out of the residence they had proudly occupied for several decades. They awkwardly dragged a few hastily packed pieces of discount luggage down the cracked concrete driveway, while leaving behind a permanently destroyed financial future. The profound public humiliation of being forcibly escorted off their foreclosed property by armed local sheriffs marked the ultimate consequence of their deeply arrogant medical conspiracy. Knowing they had absolutely nowhere else to go quickly drove them to seek emergency shelter at my personal residence, despite our previously severed biological relationship. They arrived on my front porch shivering uncontrollably under the freezing drizzle that characterized the harsh transition into the rapidly approaching winter season. The heavy raindrops soaked thoroughly through their exceptionally thin jackets, while they repeatedly pressed my doorbell seeking an immediate temporary refuge from the unforgiving weather. Standing outside my locked residential entrance like completely broken strangers, they forcefully swallowed whatever remaining pride they still possessed to beg for a warm place to sleep. The truly pathetic sight of the people who originally raised me, trembling in the bitter cold, would normally elicit deep compassion from any loyal family member. However, their previous ruthless willingness to sacrifice an elderly woman simply for personal monetary gain had successfully eradicated every single ounce of my innate filial sympathy. I slowly unlocked the heavy interior deadbolt and stepped out onto the sheltered wooden porch, while maintaining a facial expression devoid of any recognizable human mercy. Dad immediately stepped forward with his rough hands clasped tightly together in a desperate pleading motion, while freezing water dripped steadily from his thoroughly soaked hair. His voice cracked pathetically as he begged, "Sylvia, please just let us stay here for one single night because we truly do not have a single penny left in our pockets." He attempted to look incredibly pitiful, while explaining how the aggressive federal legal fines and local medical collections had successfully drained their final remaining emergency savings accounts. Mom stood silently behind him, completely stripped of her usual manipulative confidence, while silently hoping my basic human decency would magically override their past criminal transgressions. I firmly planted my feet on the wet wooden floorboards, while driving an intensely cold stare directly into their desperately hopeful eyes. I completely refuse to let their current physical suffering manipulate my emotional boundaries or erase the horrifying memory of their previous destructive actions regarding the surgical procedure. Leaning slightly forward to ensure they heard every single syllable clearly over the falling rain, I directly confronted their historical arrogance without raising my speaking voice. I asked them with absolute icy precision, "Are my priority messages and VIP medical sponsorship papers still resting comfortably inside your garage trash can?" Watching them physically flinch at the direct mention of their most catastrophic mistake confirmed they finally understood the exact reason for their current miserable predicament. The suffocating silence that immediately followed my pointed question clearly indicated they had absolutely no valid defense left to offer against my harsh judgment. They knew perfectly well that their intentional decision to discard that life-saving document directly caused this entire ongoing cascade of terrifying financial and legal disasters. I took a deliberate step backward into my warm hallway before delivering the final decisive blow to our permanently fractured biological relationship. I stared directly at them while stating with absolute finality, "No, everything is officially over between us." I smoothly turned my back on their shocked faces and forcefully slammed the heavy wooden door completely shut while decisively throwing the interior deadbolt lock. That echoing mechanical click permanently severed the toxic blood ties binding us together and officially locked their destructive greed out of my life forever. 6 months have quietly passed since that turbulent afternoon, allowing the devastating storms of family betrayal to permanently recede and make way for genuine tranquility. Grandma has completely recovered her physical strength following a highly successful corrective surgical procedure performed by the top-tier medical specialists I originally hired. She currently spends her quiet afternoons comfortably seated in my sunlit living room while slowly reading her favorite historical novels in absolute safety. Watching her slowly sip warm coffee while a deeply peaceful smile rests gently on her wrinkled face brings an incredible sense of emotional clarity to my formerly troubled mind. I finally understand that surgically removing toxic individuals from your immediate biological circle remains the absolute only way to effectively protect the innocent people you genuinely cherish. Meanwhile, the relentless gears of the federal justice system have completely crushed the arrogant reality Mom and Dad previously enjoyed. I recently received reliable updates confirming they currently inhabit a severely cramped rental apartment located in a deeply impoverished neighborhood on the far side of the city. Having permanently lost their professional reputations alongside their financial assets, forced them to accept grueling manual labor positions offering incredibly meager hourly wages. They spend their exhausting days scrubbing dirty industrial floors and hauling heavy boxes simply to make minimum monthly payments toward the insurmountable mountain of legal restitution they owe the courts. Their current miserable existence serves as a permanent daily reminder of the catastrophic price associated with treating human life like a disposable financial commodity. The stark contrast between our peaceful sanctuary and their ongoing financial nightmare validates every single harsh decision I made during that chaotic period. The local authorities officially closed their extensive fraud investigation after successfully securing multiple felony convictions against both of them for their highly deceptive medical claims. The major insurance corporation aggressively pursued maximum financial restitution through the civil court system to guarantee they would never financially recover from this calculated disaster. I feel absolutely zero regret regarding my strict refusal to offer them any temporary shelter or financial salvation on that freezing, rainy evening. Preserving my own mental health required building an impenetrable fortress against their endless emotional manipulation and bottomless corporate greed. This dedicated storytelling channel officially presents this specific narrative strictly for educational purposes regarding essential personal boundaries and effective crisis management strategies. We strongly believe in transmitting vital messages about utilizing logical reasoning and established legal mechanisms to safely navigate severe domestic exploitation. Objectively reviewing the primary events reveals exactly how the female protagonist effectively utilized decisive action to permanently protect her vulnerable grandmother from severe harm. Establishing an absolute legal severance from her highly toxic parents effectively neutralized all of their malicious financial threats. The antagonistic figures ultimately suffered the inevitable catastrophic consequences, resulting directly from their own calculated criminal decisions. Here are the most critical life lessons we can firmly extract from this devastating familial conflict. The bitter truth remains that unchecked greed and intentional deceit consistently pave a direct path toward ultimate self-destruction. Whenever you blatantly disrespect genuine kindness and gamble a family member's life strictly for monetary gain, you will inevitably lose absolutely everything you hold dear. The physical garbage bin that temporarily held their arrogant dismissal ultimately transformed into the permanent resting place for their entire financial future. Executing a complete and total cutoff from your own biological parents does not constitute an act of cruelty. Establishing this extreme moral boundary serves as a mandatory protective measure required to preserve the fundamental peace of your own personal existence. Thank you sincerely for patiently staying with us to hear the final, absolute conclusion of this incredibly turbulent story today. Sometimes demonstrating ruthless decisiveness provides the absolute only viable exit strategy from a severely devastating family tragedy. How do you personally feel about my final choice to slam the door shut and completely refuse their desperate pleas for help? Please make sure to share your honest thoughts and unique personal perspectives down in the comments section below.